Okay, we're good to go, guys.
All right. Well, thank you for coming to the April SLCN meeting. I'm Landon with the Sugar House Community Council. I know we have some new faces on here, so welcome. And thanks for coming. Today we're going to hear from, so we had a talk last week from the mayor's office about some of the bills that were passed at the legislative session, in particular SB 242. So this time we have invited Salt Lake City Transportation Director Lynn Jacobs. He should be here shortly. And then we have Utah Department of Transportation Region 2 Deputy Director Lisa Zundel here to talk about how they kind of see that one unfolding. Lynn said he's joining right now. So we'll start with Lisa. Do you want to introduce yourself? And then once Lynn joins, we'll go from there.
I'm Lisa Zundel. As Landon mentioned, I am the Deputy Director at UDOT Region 2. Region 2 covers Tooele, Salt Lake, and Summit counties, so kind of the heart of everything. I've been with the department for 23 years now in a lot of different areas, a lot in traffic and safety areas, but also in construction and design and project management. So yeah, that's me.
Hey, Lynn, are you on?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had some technology issues. Zoom didn't want to work for me, so I am here.
Wow, a hoodie today too, huh?
Yeah.
That never happens.
So this is Lynn
years of
Jacobs.
using Zoom, you think it would just work every time. I don't know why it doesn't.
This is our new transportation director for Salt Lake City. How long has it been, Lynn? About a month?
Oh, a couple. Yeah.
A couple months.
Yep.
Okay. So do you want to introduce yourself? And Lisa said that you're going to start and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so Lynn Jacobs, I'm the new Transportation Division Director. Prior to being in this position, I was the city traffic engineer. And then before that, I was a project manager, and I did a lot of the work that Landon had to deal with up in Sugar House. So he and I go back a little ways. Happy to be here with you this morning and happy to just kind of share some thoughts on the Senate Bill 242 and where we're at and what it requires of us. And I don't really have a presentation put together. I just thought I'd just kind of share with you all where we're at in the process and what we have to do, and love to hear your questions and any thoughts that you might have. So maybe with that, I'll just jump right into it. So I don't know how many people were following SB 195 last year. I'm curious if probably hard to get a raise of hand from everyone on this call.
We have a pretty good representation of the whole city on here today, from community councils across the city. So it's good.
I'm assuming that most of you knew what happened last year with Senate Bill 195. We had a bill that where the legislatures were concerned about the amount of traffic calming and other implementations that we were doing as a city, and they wanted to take a pause and just evaluate how that was going. And so last year we kind of took a pause in some of our projects and did a big study. UDOT did an amazing job. They put a ton of work in, looked at a lot of our projects. They looked at how things had been performing and how things were working. And so as a result of all that work last year, the state passed a new bill this year, Senate Bill 242. It does a couple of things. The first thing it does is effective May 6th, I believe. It makes the section of Senate Bill 195 that pertains to Salt Lake City's moratorium on our projects. It rescinds that bill, or that portion of that bill. There are other elements of Senate Bill 195 that stay in place, but that portion gets rescinded. And then it requires Salt Lake City and UDOT to enter into an agreement on how we're going to move forward with these kinds of projects in the future. The terms of that agreement still has to be negotiated with UDOT. We're working closely with Lisa and her team to kind of work through that. The bill does require a few things. It requires us to come up with what's called a tier map, or a critical capacity map, where we look at the roads in the city and we identify which roads are the most important for moving cars, and then which roads are maybe less important for that, and then we set different criteria for how we move forward with projects on those different roadways. And so that's an important thing that we're all working on together. We do not have that map finalized. We're in negotiations with UDOT on that, and so we still have some work to do there. It expanded the influence area of the bill. Senate Bill 195 was between I-15 and Foothill, and between 600 North and 2100 South. it expanded that area to include everything it moved the I-15 boundary over to Redwood, and it moved the 21st South boundary down to the southern city boundary with South Salt Lake and Mill Creek. So that it kind of expanded that study area a little bit. The bill also requires us to evaluate 3 of our projects that we've completed in the last couple of years. 200 south between 300 east and 300 west, 400 south between I-15 and West Temple, and then 300 west between 900 south and 400 south. And we're supposed to evaluate those roadways, look for impacts that we've created on traffic flow, and then mitigate any impacts that we find. And so that's a new requirement. I suppose the last thing I would mention is that they've also included in their definition of things that we need to be cautious about is consideration for removing parking. So anytime that we're working on one of the upper tier streets and we want to remove 3 parking stalls or more, we have to conduct a pretty extensive analysis and engagement effort in order to do that. Lisa, what did I miss?
I think you covered quite a bit of it. One thing I want to say from UDOT's standpoint is we really are here to support the city in these efforts and come to a solution on all of this that is mutually beneficial for all users. As Lynn mentioned, there's those 3 project areas that are requiring mitigation. Mitigation has been a word that's been highly disputed throughout all of this. There's some assumptions that means everything needs to get ripped out. That is not what is being looked for. There may be some changes that need to be made, which could require some construction, but full rip out and redo of all of those project areas is not where any of this would go. We're looking to do enhancements that would provide safe and efficient mobility for all users.
I think the closing remark I would make is that we actually have a really great relationship with UDOT, and we actually work really well together. And so from our perspective, we don't have a lot of concerns about where this bill is headed because we know we've got good partners and we can work through this together. So with that, maybe we should open it up if anyone has any questions about the bill or what we're doing.
Would be happy to start.
Yeah, Jim.
So from the Avenues perspective, it looked to me like this was all triggered by precipitous action on the part of the city. I was kind of surprised in the community council that we didn't get a lot more static than we did, not that we didn't get some, about the restriping of South Temple. But what actually happened is that people went straight to their legislators and made a fuss. And that was part of the explanation for these bills, was that the legislature was responding to constituent concerns. The city has the ability to do certain things like restriping without any notice, but that doesn't mean it's a good idea. Ditto speed bumps. The city has speed bumps that work very well and operate at the speed limits of the roads that they're on. The city also still installs very abrupt speed bumps that seem to be mainly designed just to force traffic off of streets. And nobody likes those. Same deal. We have mechanisms in the community council to provide public information about these things and to receive feedback. But if nobody knows it's going to happen, none of this works.
I appreciate those thoughts, Jim. I think a couple of things that have been really highlighted strongly for us as a city throughout this entire process is that we could do a better job of getting the word out about what we're doing. And one of the requirements of Senate Bill 242 is that before we implement what's called a highway reduction strategy in the bill, which includes any kind of traffic calming, like you've mentioned, or lane reconfiguration or restriping or anything like that, it requires us to do a much more detailed analysis, data collection, and then also community and business engagement than we've done in the past. I'll be the first to admit that the city, we try really hard to get the word out. We're not always very successful at that. And I think it's something that we can definitely work on. And that's something that we're committed to doing. As a matter of fact, not only committed, required by the state law to do. And so it's something that you're going to probably see us try to really up our game in terms of engagement. It is really hard to get people to pay attention to something until we're there building it. And so that's been a struggle for us, and something that we hope that the community councils can actually really help us solve, along with a lot of our other good important stakeholders in the city. So that probably didn't answer all of your questions, Jim. Did that help, or do you have
It does. I would respond that when the I Street Coalition was looking at traffic calming with the transportation department back in, I would say, the 90s, what they did is they installed temporary versions of things that they were considering so that those things could be modeled. This also made everybody aware that those things were being looked at. And I know that's probably fairly expensive, but for some major changes, it might be, well, high impact changes, let's say.
Yeah.
It might be appropriate to look at some sort of modeling that would show users exactly what's being considered.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Jim. We have done that on occasion. One of the more recent ones is when we converted the intersection at 9th and 9th to a roundabout. I don't know if you all remember, we kind of did a version of it with cones before we actually built the thing,
Yep,
and
right.
got a lot
Excellent
of really
example.
great feedback. And to your point, that was incredibly expensive to do. And so, we always have to weigh use of city funds in that way for something temporary versus something more permanent. But it definitely, in the right application, has been really helpful for us to do that in the past. And I think we'll continue to look for opportunities to do stuff like that in the future.
Okay, thank you, Lynn.
Yeah, no, that was great. Appreciate
and
your thoughts.
Congratulations on your promotion.
Thank you. Lisa.
I would maybe add to Lynn's comment about outreach. I think this group and the neighborhood councils that you represent can really help the transportation group do that outreach, inviting the transportation group to your council meetings, that the residents of your specific neighborhood can come and talk to them about specific projects and stuff, can be a real benefit to Lynn and his team as far as getting the word out and helping people understand what these projects look like. So this group has a real hand in making sure those conversations are happening with the residents within your communities, within your neighborhoods.
To add to that, Lisa, and thank you. That was perfect. I agree 100%. One of the things that's been highlighted for us is that, historically we've done a fairly good job of engaging with the people immediately adjacent to a project that we're working on. And we haven't done as good of a job of engaging the community as a whole, especially like the business community or people that maybe use the facility that don't live right there. And so I think to Lisa's point, this group could really help us evaluate how the whole community feels about a project that we're doing, more than just the people that live right on the street that are being impacted. And I think it's important that we engage with both groups. Obviously the people who are most impacted by it have a lot to say about what is going on, but everybody else cares too. So we definitely need to up our game on that front.
You're aware that that transportation backed off on public engagement in response to these bills. For instance, we were ready to take a presentation on the 13th East study, but then when these bills came up and the ground sort of shifted, that thing has still not happened, and it's been a couple of years since it was originally floated.
Yeah, that was a requirement of Senate Bill 195 that we kind of put a pin in a lot of the work we were doing. And so we were fortunately able to move forward with a couple of our projects that were already under construction, but things like 13th East that were in planning, SB 195 definitely put a pause in a lot of that work. And I think we are hopeful to get that study back on its feet and hopefully get it finished. It definitely looks a little bit different now as a result of the bills and what's happened. So it's a challenging time, to say the least. So yeah, thank you, Jim.
Jason, go ahead.
All right, just trying to find the unmute button. This is Jason Wessel. I'm representing the West Side Coalition, which is the 6 West Side community councils. And I kind of have 2 questions. The first is, when will we get some clarification or definition of the Tier 1 and Tier 2 streets, or get an overlay so we know which 242 applies to? And then second, in the past, when we've done tried to get traffic calming in the neighborhoods, it's been a very Byzantine process, bouncing around between stakeholders and agencies that stretches on for years. Is this process going to be a way where we can make it more transparent and maybe streamline that process? Or are we going to add months or years on top of an already long process to try to get something done? Specifically, we've got the area around the new Glendale Regional Park. There was a child hit by a car. With the increased traffic flow, increased pedestrian traffic, are we looking at months or years before we can get traffic calming around that new park? So anyway, I know that's kind of a long 3-part question, but I'll let you tackle it however you wish.
Yeah.
Lynn, can I take the beginning of this one?
Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
So we are working diligently, the city and UDOT, to finalize the critical capacity tiered map. Lynn and I have a meeting, I think it's actually next week, for several hours with our teams to go through the draft map that has been put out there, and talk about where changes might come and all of that. Our goal is to have that finalized at the latest by the fall. We're hoping to have the map finalized before then, and then the agreement that Lynn mentioned earlier done by fall for sure. But one thing I will say is I was very adamant as we went through the process with the legislature this last session that the streets on the west side, because they were not part of the original study that was done based on Senate Bill 195, that they not be Tier 1, with the exception of Redwood Road, because UDOT controls Redwood Road. But all of the streets within west of I-15 will be Tier 2 or lower, because we don't feel like it's fair to the communities on that west side to have not gone through the study process that we did for 195 east of I-15, to say that nothing can happen there. We want to be able to do the appropriate studies and do the right solutions in those areas without the restrictions of the Tier 1, which is the most restrictive tier.
And that's fantastic, Lisa. I agree with everything you just said. One thing that you should bear in mind about this tier map that we're putting together, it's called the critical capacity volume or critical capacity ROTS map, or the tier map, right? And we're hoping to define those tiers based more on technical criteria than anything. So we want to look at how the entire network functions and make sure that we have good connectivity of our Tier 1 streets to, basically connect our regional facilities to the regional transportation network, the freeway system, and also connect them to each other. Tier 2 roads are important to regional mobility, but maybe a little bit less so. And then Tier 3 are less critical, and then Tier 4 are local streets, right? And so our goal, our plan is to work through this with UDOT together, using all of our technical expertise to come up with what we think are appropriate designations for each of these roadways. The city in Senate Bill 242 is required to adopt that tier map. And so we've got to take it through an adoption process. For us, what that looks like is first a trip to Planning Commission, and then next a trip to City Council to get it adopted basically as a general plan for the city. And so we're working with our friends in planning to try to get that all kind of pave that road as well on our side. But fundamentally, the designation of these roadways should be based more on how they are functioning, how they need to function in the future, and less on, I'm sure a lot of people will say, well, I want the road in front of me to be tiered, da-da-da. And we're really just trying to base it in technical criteria and how they need to be designated so that the entire system operates well for everyone that's trying to use it.
Even Tier 1 routes, that, as I mentioned, are the most restrictive. they still, the legislation, one of the changes that happened with 242 allowed for safety improvements to happen on those roadways. So that's some of the conversations we're having with the city. In fact, UDOT's planning to put in a pedestrian crossing on Redwood Road, even though it's more than likely going to be a tier 1 route. We're still looking at the appropriate safety improvements to happen on those roadways. Lynn, do you want to talk about the Glendale Park stuff?
Yeah, this is a hard one for us. We have long planned to add more pedestrian crossings at Glendale Park. If you go back and look at the Glendale Park master plan, you'll notice that there's another crossing that we have not built that's identified. In the plan, it was identified to connect that parking lot on the north side of the street with the new park on the south side of the street. Conversations we've been having internally, it may make sense to shift where that future crosswalk goes further west to better align with the neighborhood. And so that's something we're talking about. For the last 2 or 3 years, we've had an upgrade to the existing crosswalk there in development. So it will be upgraded right now. It's what's called a rapid rectangular flashing beacon. You guys see the signs with the kind of the flashing lights when a pedestrian pushes it. It's being upgraded to what's called a pedestrian hybrid beacon or a hawk signal, which is an overhead signal that is more effective for a multi-lane road like 1700 South. And so that is really close to being completed. Most of the construction has already been done. All of the underground materials are there. We're just waiting for the steel post to arrive. I think Lisa can probably attest, this is a challenge with signals. It's hard to get steel right now. And so those posts, those big poles that you see out there for signals, they're kind of on back order. And so we're trying to get those poles installed. As soon as we do, then that crossing will be upgraded from what it is to what it's planned to be. I mean, that's been in the works for years and years. It takes years to do a project like that. You know, it just does, because we have to design it. We have to find a contractor to build it. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes quite a bit of work. We've been talking with UDOT about the appropriateness of adding that second crosswalk sooner rather than later. I don't know that we have a decision on that yet. It's something that we're all collectively evaluating together. And as soon as we have a decision on that, we'll probably be back to the community to let them know how we're planning on proceeding. And so lots to be seen there. I think the last part of your question about this traffic calming that we're doing, whether this bill will make that process easier, streamlined, or whether it will make it harder, I think time will tell on that, to be honest. The way that it works, local streets, we're allowed to continue to move forward with these kind of traffic calming implementations without any additional oversight from UDOT. And so for our local streets, I think those continue to move at the pace they have moved. It boils down to kind of two things. It boils down to funding that we receive from council to implement those projects, and it also just boils down to the number of staff that we have available to work on those. And so I think we are cranking through. The first 10 traffic calming zones have been fully constructed. The next 5 are almost done, and then the following 5 are in design right now. And so it's been a few years to get to this point, but we've got the engine built pretty good for getting those local streets calmed, and that's moving along pretty well. It takes forever, because to do it right, we have to do a lot of data collection. We have to do a lot of analysis. We have to do a lot of engagement with the community. It's not something we can just snap our fingers and make happen. I wish it were. It's just not. It takes time to get these things done. I think for our tier 1 streets, obviously we're not going to be doing traffic calming. Anything we do there is going to be more safety enhancements, like adding a new pedestrian crosswalk or something like that. The tier 2 and tier 3 streets will require more analysis and engagement than we used to do. But honestly, that's what we've learned from this process, is that we need to do more of that. So it's really bringing us into alignment with working closer with our communities to do what we need to do.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate those responses. I think I'll just say in closing, I think our primary concern is figuring out what the distinction between the tier 2 and tier 3 streets are going to be, as to how we tackle the process of whether it's more rigorous or less rigorous. And until we actually know what is tier 2 versus tier 3, we're kind of concerned about what the process will be in the future. But thank you.
And then the process for our tier 2 road project implementation versus a tier 3 road project implementation is still being negotiated between us and UDOT. So we really don't know if there's going to, it may be that we use the same process for both, and it may be that we don't get quite as aggressive with our analysis engagement on a tier 3 street because it's just lower priority. And, you know, as a city, we only have so many resources. And so the more we spend on something, it means that we get to do less stuff. And so we are always weighing out, trying to scale things appropriately. And that's yet to be determined, Jason. But I really appreciate your comments and your questions.
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay, I didn't want to monopolize any of this, so let's have a little chat about Third West, and other people can jump in because that's something that we all use, right? So Third West, as you know, you drive along the downtown section of it, the speed limit changes so many times within a few blocks that it gets widely ignored. So that you get the consensus speed of about 30 miles an hour through there because you just can't keep track of all that. And now we have the enhancements to the bike lanes, which produce curb structures that protrude into the intersection as you're making a turn. My theory of pedestrian safety has always been that the first thing you have to do is be able to see the pedestrians. And if drivers are concentrating on multiple signage, fancy yellow signs that point out crosswalks that drivers look at because they're trained to look out signs, or intrusive bulb outs that drivers have to watch because they're going to end up in the oncoming lanes if they don't, so they're not watching for bicycles or pedestrians crossing the street. These things, we try these things out and we put them up, and it seems like we're searching for things that will help by complicating the interchange, and the complication just distracts from visual drivers actually seeing pedestrians and bicycles. And I just wonder if anybody else's perceptions match those, or if I'm out in left field again.
I would actually love to hear from the rest of the group on this topic. I think this is exactly what this group could be really helpful in helping us figure out is what are the impacts, and if the islands are the impacts, I'd love to hear from the rest of this group if other people feel the same way. That would actually be really valuable to hear. So, Jim, I love that you brought this up. Does anyone else have an opinion about them? It's a safe space too. You won't hurt my feelings, I promise.
All right, I'll weigh in as a differing opinion.
Of course, Dennis will.
I'm a big fan. I think if you have too simple a clear lane, then it encourages motorists to accelerate. I think you need those additional complications to be able to bring their attention back to the road instead of their phone, to focus on what they're doing there and to slow them down so that they can be more aware of their surroundings and the other modes of transportation that are near them in that moment. So I think there's a pretty strong argument for it. Otherwise, you'd end up with a Strode everywhere.
Go ahead, Emily.
I am downtown community council, and so not the ones on Third West necessarily, but just the ones on West Temple. The way those you know, the curbs are much higher, the pedestrian spaces, it just feels a lot safer to be walking down there. And it has forced me when I am driving to be far more attentive. And I really appreciate that because no one is looking at pedestrians when they are driving through downtown. And so I'm really glad that there are a bunch of hazards that, oh, if I don't do that right, I'm going to go up on that curb and that could injure my car. Not my car, because I drive a tall car, but a short car for sure. And so I really appreciate them.
Just to be clear, we don't want anyone to damage their car either. That's not what we're after, right?
Oh,
Like,
I know, but I
Yeah.
have no problem wishing ill upon people who are trying to do too much multitasking in their car, getting their bumper scraped up.
Thanks, Emily. I appreciate that.
Hey, Lynn, we've had some people kind of join late. Do you mind giving a little synopsis of what you guys were talking about?
Yeah, so at this particular point in the conversation, we're talking about the 300 West project, and whether the islands that were put in at the corners are appropriate, or whether they need to be modified or completely removed, to be honest. If they're working, if they're causing more problems than they're worth, that's kind of what this current conversation is about. Jim, I do want to get back to your speed limit conversation and at the end of this, so I haven't forgotten. Let's put a pin in that for a second and come back to it. So if anyone else has thoughts on the Third West, or honestly the Third West, the Fourth South project, or the Second South project that we've completed, those are all the three projects that we are looking for what the impacts are so that we can find mitigations. And so if you are aware of an impact, or if you've noticed something or observed something, or there's something you don't like about how those facilities operate, this is a really valuable time for us to hear that so that we can develop mitigations to address those issues.
Like we're doing.
So let's assume you're not on your phone, because people driving on phones are irresponsible and just create a huge hazard. And they're just not driving, right? Because they're on their phone. So you come up to one of those intersections, and the first thing you need to look for is pedestrians and bicycles. The second thing that's helpful is the walk lights. You glance at the walk lights because they now have a bicycle function as well. So those are really helpful in determining if there's possible oncoming traffic at speed, because we all know that bicycles are now capable of 20 miles an hour plus. And then not seeing any of that, you make your turn. But while you're making your turn, you have to focus on the lane distribution. And that takes your focus away from those things that you should be looking for.
And to that point, Jim, one of the big concerns that we see on Third West and that we hear from a lot of people are when you're leaving one of the driveways, like any of the major driveways along that roadway or side street intersection, you're often, if you're pulling out onto Third West and you're just making a right-hand turn, you're often looking to your left at oncoming traffic to look for gaps. And you're not necessarily looking at the trail user who's coming up from your right-hand side. And so this is something that we are really struggling with as a city, because we've seen a few incidents with that issue. And it's something that we're trying to address. To your point, maybe it's better to have less signage so that people pay more attention to what's going on. But in this case, we're actually talking about adding some more signage to just remind people, okay, you also have to look to your right for trail users that are coming. And then adding signage or markings, pavement markings for the trail users, reminding them that they also need to be aware of cars in front of them, and that, even if they have legally the right of way, the rules of physics dictate that if they get tangled with a car, it's probably going to be a bad outcome for them. And so we're looking at maybe adding some pavement markings on Third West for the trail users. If you're downtown and you're at a crosswalk, we have those look symbols that have the two eyes in them to tell you as a pedestrian to look for traffic. We're going to be adding those at certain sections on the 300 West Trail to the trail so that cyclists can, hopefully see that and remind them, okay, you might want to, you're approaching a driveway, you're approaching an intersection, you need to kind of slow down and look and see what's going on. make sure that you're aware, because the best thing we can do is just make everyone aware of each other. And so that's something we're looking at doing, but it's like adding more. And so your earlier comment about maybe we shouldn't add as much. We always struggle with this. It's a hard thing. Traffic engineering is not exact science. It's more of an art. And so it's a hard thing for us to balance. So yeah, great point. Sorry, I talk way too much. What else does everyone else have to say?
That's totally fine, Lynn. Usually this group is a little bit more chatty than they are today. I think they're maybe digesting everything, but I saw Jason unmute. So Jason, if you had a comment, go for it.
This is kind of just off the top of my head thing, but I remember about a million years ago when I was an undergraduate at the U. At the beginning of every school year, there would be 2 or 3 or 4 accidents around the roundabout over there by Rice Eccles Stadium. But that was because people weren't accustomed to roundabouts. Now that we have more roundabouts around, we see less and less accidents because people have gotten used to that kind of traffic pattern. So I wonder if we're just in kind of the growing pains of people getting adjusted to these new pedestrian-oriented safety measures, and that it'll smooth out as people get more accustomed to the new look and the new feel of it. I mean, it's going to be a rough couple of years till we get there, but as the debate was going on, 25 years ago up at the U, should they get rid of roundabouts because people don't know how to use them, or should we try to get people more accustomed to, a new safety feature? So I just want to throw that kind of out there of it's annoying and difficult now, but can we adjust to it?
Good point, Jason. So there's also a professor at the university who did a study using simulators on cell phones and drivers and discovered that the part of your brain that you use for conversation you need for driving. And so there are some things that can be overcome by learning, and there are some things that can't. And distinguishing what those things are is not always intuitive.
This is Emily here, downtown community council member. Sort of separate from this, or kind of inquiring about the street levels. I'm fairly new to this, but I live on 3rd South, and my office is in the lower Western Avenues, and so basically my commute is State Street. I'm often walking if I can, but depending on what time of year it is, that can feel pretty dangerous, especially during conference weekend. But I have noticed, both as a driver and as a pedestrian, that the crosswalk lights that can be initiated, the sort of half block lights on State Street, take a really long time to turn. And so then there isn't much, they don't feel very efficient in terms of actually, immediately reacting to the person who is looking to walk. They seem to behave more like the regular stoplights in some way, that it's you press it and it's a minute and a half or something until it goes. So I don't know if you guys are in control of that street, because I know it is a state, a tier 1 street, but those lights, I'm just wondering if there's a way that we could speed up the responsiveness of those. So when you hit it, it actually starts to turn.
Well, and I'll take this one. Emily, I don't know if you were on when I introduced myself. I'm Lisa Zundel. I'm with UDOT. The timing of those lights is intentional. They are timed with the signals on either side of them. The intent of those lights is to shorten the pedestrian path, not necessarily prioritize the pedestrian. They are timed to give efficient crossing for the pedestrian, but can continue to give us efficient flow on State Street for the vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. I will just put this out here. I know no one is in charge of this, but we really need enforcement of running red lights on those streets because it is so dangerous for any of us who are down there. So
we
yeah.
need enforcement of running red lights on every street.
It's a huge problem, and you're spot on, Emily.
Anybody else have any questions for these guys? Is Jennifer on?
Yes, I just got on. Sorry.
Oh, great.
It was a bad morning for this meeting. So I did. I'm sorry. I don't know what we've discussed all so far, but I know that we were kind of looking for a path forward, and I know we might still be in the middle of that as far as like how are we going to make this work for people who have things that come up, traffic safety issues that come up, and then you know, we can talk to the city about it, but is there a way to get the city and state and residents all on the same page so that any thing that gets implemented or studied can be done efficiently?
Jennifer, I would say yes. We are trying to make this process as efficient as we can. I think Lynn could jump in here. A lot of the projects that you all see throughout the city that the city is implementing, there's actually years of work that happened prior to that project actually going in that maybe publicly is not aware of, but Lynn and his team are behind the scenes looking at all the technical details and doing the design and all of that kind of stuff. But it is not our desire to hinder the progression of these projects. When study is needed for a project, that study should be done efficiently and effectively. And the engagement with the community should be a part of that. But I just last week, Lynn reached out to me on some approvals for some enhanced pedestrian crossings that they wanted to move forward with. And we gave that approval because they are safety enhancements that absolutely make sense. So we are trying to do things in their interim while we get the map finalized and the agreement put in place that the city and UDOT will be doing. We are trying to do some interim approvals, if you want to use that term, to make sure appropriate things keep moving forward.
And that lines up really well with what we heard from the bill sponsors, and their intent was not to stop us from doing what we need to do to save lives in our city. But frankly, a lot of times we have a new issue that pops up, and we have a desire to just do something. Like we just want to do, because it's just a horrible thing that happened, and we all want to do something. And I've learned through hard experience that often we need to take a minute, pause, figure out what the right thing is to do, and then move forward with that. Because if we don't, we often end up with unintended consequences of picking the wrong action that was easier to do than picking the right action that maybe takes longer and is harder. And so it's a struggle. It's a huge struggle to try to take all the limited city resources and spread them out over the whole city and try to find ways to address all the problems that we have. I mean, we have anywhere between 15 and 20 people that die a year in our city on our streets. And it just tears us up inside, you know, and we put a lot of work into trying to figure out how to stop that from happening. We want to keep doing that work, but we want to do it more intentionally and more strategically and smarter. And so what we heard from the state legislature loud and clear is that we can't just make everything about safety. We also have to consider everybody's needs as they get around the city. We have to make sure the city still works, still efficient, that people can still get where they need to go. And so we really need to take the time to get it right. And that does take time. It just does. And I hate to say that, but that's the reality of our world. Yeah.
I know Jim has his hands up. Can I ask one more question real quick?
Of course. Hey, Jennifer, why don't you introduce what community council you represent?
Oh, sorry, I'm Glendale Neighborhood Council, Glen. So as far as like the budgetary allocation between state and city, I know, so the state is supposed to be doing studies. So is this mostly going to be like split evenly between city and state?
I would dare say a lot of this is going to fall to the city. The state did our study, so Senate Bill 195 happened in 2025 legislative session. Senate Bill 242 happened and made changes that we referenced earlier in the 2026 legislative session. So UDOT's done our larger study. We will be involved, have oversight on some of the future studies that the city will do. And if the proposed project is on a state route, UDOT would take that responsibility for those studies, but this will largely fall to the city.
Okay.
The
Thanks.
project sponsor that has the responsibility to complete the studies and the engagement and all the heavy lifting to get anything done. But honestly, Jennifer, we've been doing that for years, right? Like what we haven't done is we haven't been very consistent about how we do it or about how we document it. And that was something that was highlighted for us through this process. And so one thing that we're trying to improve on is just being more consistent in the way that we execute this work and the way that we document this work so that we're just a little bit more defensible, you know, and have really good reasons for everything we're doing. And so that's a good thing. I mean, it might take us a little bit longer to get some things done, but it's important that we do it right. So that's probably where that lands. But yeah, it is and has always been incumbent upon us to lead and pay for and do whatever study that is needed. In this case, UDOT now has an extra role that they didn't have before in providing some oversight review of the work that we're doing.
I saw at the mayor's luncheon recently, they went over some of the budget, and I was kind of surprised to see that a lot of the transportation and safety monies are coming from different segments. So it seems it's not super clear to me as somebody who's not really familiar with the organization of the city to see where all of that money is coming from. And I know that the budget is going to be hard this year. So it would be great to kind of get a little bit of insight about that too. Maybe if you can send something over later.
Yeah, Jennifer, I think it might be worth it for us to sit down together sometime and talk about it's complicated. It's complicated for me. I mean, I've been the director for a couple months and it's like my head is spinning figuring out all the funding sources and what's paying for what and where that money's coming from and how is it eligible. There's a lot of eligibility rules. So, you know, we get money from we often get money from local. I mean, a lot of our money comes from local sales tax and for property taxes and things that you all are paying for. Some of our money comes from state grants that we apply for and receive. Some of it comes from federal grants that we apply for and receive. All of the different funding sources have different rules about how they can be spent. Everything from, you know, our CIP money to our impact fee money to federal grant. Like we've recently been awarded it's called an SS4A grant, Safe Streets for All grant for Redwood Road. So we're going to be working closely with UDOT. It's interesting because it's their road. In this case, the federal government made Salt Lake City the recipient of that money, but we're obviously going to work really closely together to make sure that we do it right and use that money appropriately. And so, you know, it's a wild thing. The whole transportation funding finance thing is just crazy. And the thing that's even crazier that most people don't know is just how much stuff costs. So, you know, a new pedestrian hybrid signal, if we were to implement one, they're costing us anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000 now, you know, depending on, we can get a really good deal if we bundle a bunch together and, you know, try to bid it at the right time. But quite often they're more like $450,000, $500,000 is what's costing us to build one of those things. And a full blown traffic signal is even more than that. It's like $500,000, $600,000. Crazy thing for me is that like 10 years ago, it was half of those costs. Inflation has hit our industry in a huge way. Everything costs so much to do. And it's just almost absurd to me, but it's the way it is.
Hey, Lynn, we have about 8 minutes left. Do you and Lisa mind putting your contact info in the chat so people can reach out if maybe these folks can help you out in the future? Jim, go ahead.
Beg your pardon. How much of this is you guys as transportation people trying to compensate for the general lack of safety enforcement and driver training that kind of flows down from the libertarian stance of the legislature?
if people would just follow the rules and drive like they're supposed to, I don't know that Lisa and I would have anything to do. Which is, I would much rather that outcome. But unfortunately, I think that we have a lot of people in the world that just are busy in their days and are apt to make mistakes when they're driving. Human error is almost always the cause of our big accidents. As we go back and look at what's happened, it's almost always boils down to human error. But in reality, the cost that people pay when an accident is made, you make a mistake. Okay, yeah, don't look at your phone when you're driving, but someone's going to. And when they do for just a second, a pedestrian steps out in front of them and there's a huge tragic event. I mean, that's not like, the punishment doesn't fit the crime, right? Like, and the thing that we try to do as a city is we really are working on trying to make our streets to be a little bit more forgiving, so that when people do make a mistake, it maybe doesn't end in a fatality. It maybe is someone gets hurt but doesn't get killed, or or hopefully doesn't get hurt at all. Lowering the stakes is really what we are trying to do as a city, and it's a hard thing to do.
Well, and to add to that, UDOT does have the education campaign through Zero Fatalities, if you've heard of that group. And one of our current campaign is called Drive Good, and it's messages about driving alert, focused, calm, sober, and buckled. And so getting people to get back to those basics of paying attention while you're driving, not driving when you're drowsy, obviously not driving when you're under the influence in any way, and driving buckled are all important things. And that's what our current campaign is focusing on.
Emily, go ahead.
Thanks. Kind of going back to the big closures that we're anticipating next year in relation to the open house, as someone who lives in downtown, the part of the closure happens within the downtown community council. I know I had suggested this or asked this of Lynn when he attended our meeting last week, but I would really love a little bit of good neighbor behavior from the people hosting the open house. And to me, given I am not going to be able to transit where I live very easily for about 6 months, getting to the grocery store will be a challenge. I would love to be able to ride tracks for free. And I don't know what the mechanism is for going to the church and saying, hey, you're going to be destroying where I live for 6 months. I think you can do me this solid, but I know I have people who have louder voices than I do in here. And so I'm just going to put that out again. It is going to be so disruptive to those of us who actually live there. And yeah, it feels like the smallest of gestures that they could do. So putting it out there in the hopes that I can start making something happen. But yeah.
Lisa and I are in constant community. We're meeting regularly with those folks, and we're working on trying to mitigate those impacts as much as we can. There have been discussions about free transit. I don't know that they're really landing well with a lot of folks for a lot of reasons. We could probably talk for hours about that. You are aware of our Hive Pass, right? I just want to make sure that you're taking advantage of the benefit that you could get from that.
Yeah, I mean, I just try to walk everywhere, but I'm anticipating that I'm going to have to really start using, and I will get the Hive Pass, but what I'd really like to do is just have the people who are shutting down the streets for 6 months help me out.
Yeah, and we're looking at a bunch of mitigations that they're planning on doing. So it's not, it's a broader thing. The impacts that they're going to have are not only on downtown, but also on folks in the avenues, folks in Fair Park, folks in Rose Park. Like that whole end of the city is going to have some impacts. We're working really closely with them to try to minimize those impacts, and also just get good information out to people about what to do, how to get around while this is happening. And so we're still about 11 months out from that happening, and so we've got a lot of work left to do. And we don't want to get too far out in front of it, or else we tell everybody what to do and then they forget 11 months from now. So we're doing our best to try to time that right.
Thanks, Lynn.
Yeah.
Did you see Lynn's response in the chat for your speed limit before we shut it down?
I have not, but I will look. Thank you.
Well, we had a few signs that were put up in error on Third West last year. That's why you're seeing the speed limit discrepancy. I think that's all been resolved. I've driven it several times looking for if we have any speed limit signs that are wrong. If you see a discrepancy, don't hesitate to let me know. I think we've got it fixed, but there's so many signs out there. It's like, crap, I've driven that thing 8 times looking for it. And, we still had one. What happened was that the contractor that was working on the Third West project put the wrong sign up. And it threw us through a loop for a few months while we were trying to figure out, no, we fixed that. That's already done. And then it's like, no, we didn't. Oh, crap. Signs are wrong. And so, yeah, shocking that the city gets that wrong sometimes.
Well, thank you guys for coming. Thanks, Lisa, and thanks, Lynn, for coming today.
Absolutely.
Hopefully
Thank
it was
you.
helpful. Okay. Thanks, guys. We'll
Thank you
see you
all.
in May. Thanks, guys. Well done.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.